Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. Happy Tuesday. I like to say that Tuesdays are for the table of diversity, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, I'm just going to share a little bit about the table of diversity, and today's topic is what's the purpose? Because one of the questions that I get sometimes is folks are like, this is cool. It's a really fun, neat tool, but what's the purpose? Like, what am I supposed to do with it? And so let's talk a little bit about that today. And then we can dive into some other fun things that are happening and coming up. So the first thing that I want to kind of do is let's oh, you know what? Let me just share. Let me share a picture of the table of diversity. All right, so you can see there the table of diversity very much looks like the tool that you might have used in your chemistry class called the periodic table of elements. And the table of diversity really works the same way. So, if I could just give a little background about how this got started, I was studying for a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology with a focus in diversity and inclusion. And I would go to various classes where we would talk about, women at work. And industrial and organizational psychology is the study of people at work. So we would break that down based on women at work and how women are experiencing the world. And then we talk about people of color at work and the experiences of people of color at work. And, it would be all of these different sort of experiences of people at work. And it was great. I mean, I was learning a lot. I felt like my um, professors and classmates had a lot of really engaging questions and perspectives to share. So I really was learning a lot. The only problem was that I didn't feel like I could bring my entire experience to any one class. I'd go to the women at work class, and it was very much like the mainstream experience of women. I couldn't really talk about, there wasn't space in the conversation for me to talk about my experience as a Black woman, which there are some things that are very unique to Black women. And then I'd go to, the class about people of color at work, and I couldn't really bring in there the experiences that I had as a Black woman. And so there wasn't really a space to talk about that. And so I went to my advisor and I said, what am I missing? Like, is it just me? Or what can I do to fix this? And my advisor asked me if I knew about intersectionality. And this was 10 years ago. So intersectionality back then definitely wasn't as commonplace as it is today. And so then I was like, I'm not quite familiar with this. And in true educational format, my professor sent me on a journey to learn more. And so I, started to dive deep into the research to better understand intersectionality. And I knew that it was the missing piece for my own experience. But then I also thought about how we facilitate DEI within the workplace, within our organizations. And I thought this is something we need to spend more time focused on, is the intersectional experience. And I knew I wanted to bring it back and talk about it within, especially the corporate environment. And so I did. I started talking about intersectionality and the importance of it everywhere that I went. I would talk to HR teams, I would talk to leadership teams. DEI, there weren't a whole lot of DEI professionals, in the role within a lot of companies. And so I would talk to whoever was doing the work. And I remember trying to describe intersectionality, and I was doing a horrible job. I mean, folks would not understand what I was saying because I was doing a really bad job of trying to explain it. So I knew I needed a tool to help me explain it and to really illustrate what I meant. So I went through just kind of a list of ideas of different ways to kind of talk about this and describe it. And then I tapped into my chemistry background. So I majored in chemistry for 2.5 years in college. And I remembered, as our chemistry teachers, both in high school and in college, talked about the periodic table of elements, they talk about some of those individual elements and then they'd get to the compounds. And I remember that concept aligned perfectly with diversity, equity, and inclusion, but specifically with diversity. And so I thought to myself, what if I created a table of diversity that operated very similar to the periodic table of elements? And that served kind of as the foundation for chemistry. You can't have anything in chemistry without the periodic table of elements. And I thought, what if the table of diversity served as kind of that foundation for inclusion, for equity, belonging, for justice, all the things that we talk about and associate with this work. And so, actually, when I created it, I didn't show anyone for quite some time because I was like, this is silly. Like, no one is going to take me seriously for this tool. No one's going to. It's crazy. And so I didn't show anyone until I got some encouragement from a friend who was like, it's driving you insane. Like, you've got to show people, you've got to put it out into the world, and you'll know either way. Either folks are going to see value in it, or folks are going to laugh you back to what you were doing before. And so I decided I was going to go big or I was going to go home. Like, either I'm going to get what I need either way. And I decided to present it at a DEI conference. And this was put on by an educational institution, but it was open to anyone within the community. So students, professors, DEI leaders within the community, other leaders, community members. Like, it was open to everyone. And I said, this is it. I'm going to get everyone in the same room, and I'm going to get the feedback that I need. And I'll know whether I can continue or I need to shut it down. And I guess the rest is history, since I'm here today talking about it 10 years later. But that was kind of the initial purpose, was to talk about intersectionality. And if you think about the definition of intersectionality, it's not just the intersection of our identities and the experiences that we have because of those, but it's the intersection of the systems that we live in and how we as intersectional people experience these systems. And so if you think about that, it takes us from an individual perspective all the way through to a system perspective. And that's what I love about intersectionality, because as I'm talking about it, people decide where they are in that journey. Are you at a place where you're thinking about this as it relates to yourself, to others, those around you, or are you thinking about it from a systemic perspective? And that was kind of where it started. Since then, the table of diversity has really blossomed, and it has expanded really its purpose. So there are a couple of things that the table of diversity does, and I'll share that with you as well. The table of diversity is things where, year over year, and I update it every 2 years, but it's one of those things that I'm always excited about, always excited to talk about and to, provide updates to. And so the, Tuesdays are for the table of diversity. My goal is to go live every single Tuesday on this platform to share a little bit more about the table of diversity so you can better understand how you can use it within your organization. Okay, so now let's talk about the 3 main objectives of the table of diversity. And this is relatively new. So if you've not been, kind of tuned in since maybe November of last year, the 2025 table of diversity was released in August of last year. Parts of this framework were released in November of last year. Then we've got some catching up to. And so let's do that now. The 3 objectives of the table of diversity. First and foremost, it's to expand how we see and value people. In other words, it's to expand our definition of diversity. So the table of diversity includes so many aspects of identity that are outside of those kind of traditional aspects of diversity that we typically think of. So, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, those first 3 columns on the table of diversity Um, those are important. We absolutely have to think of those aspects of identity, but those aren't the only things that shape our experiences, that shape how we show up, that shape how we experience the world. And so the table of diversity helps us say, wait a minute, there's more to ourselves, there's more to the people around us that influence who we are. And we also need to be cognizant of those things. So that's the first kind of objective of the table of diversity. And here's the thing that I often find to be really interesting. If someone who's never seen the table of diversity, if you were to say, tell me how you define diversity, it's not going to be as extensive as what you see on the table of diversity. But the moment someone sees the table of diversity, they're like, yes, all of that makes sense. And it is part of my definition of diversity, but those things aren't always top of mind. The table of diversity helps us keep things top of mind. So as we're going through our day-to-day work, whether the table of diversity is hanging up in your office, it's hanging up in your cubicle, or, you have one of my, here's my journal. Oh, here it is. Or you're like me and you have the table of diversity journal. There we go. It's part of how you function day to day so that you can't forget it. And it's always there as that visual reminder of all the types of people that we encounter, all the things that are important about us and that may influence how we show up. And so it's a really powerful tool that doesn't take a whole lot of work to be effective. So that's the first thing. And that is really beneficial to people individually. So there are a lot of folks who are like, you know what, my organization, my team might not be focused on this, but I am. And can utilize this particular objective to get to their end goal. This is also great for teams. So I often find that sometimes teams need their own kind of efforts, need their own sort of initiatives, their own journey to better understand themselves and their teammates. And this is a great tool to get there. And when I say tool, it's the table of diversity itself, but it's also I've talked about this a couple of times. Oh, let me see if I can get in focus here. There we go. The table of diversity toolkit, which is the activity and discussion set. And so if you think about how to use the table of diversity, I've kind of made it easy for you. But even if you don't have this, I'm sharing with you ways that you can utilize the table of diversity. The second objective is the intersectionality piece. And I think, again, this is the best of both worlds, because you are back to that story of, in the beginning where I shared, how do we think about intersectionality, bringing our experiences to the table, bringing our experiences to the policies, the procedures, the processes that we create on a regular basis. It's the best of both worlds when you're talking about intersectionality, which is why that's a place that I love to start. But it's about those compounds. It's about those identity compounds that shift and change and elevate and transform everything that you've thought about diversity, equity, inclusion so far, and really takes it to the next level. Like, you can't have a focus on intersectionality without changing the way that you do things in the name of DEI. And the table of diversity is not a tool that easily fits into your current DEI efforts. It's not. It isn't. So if you were to take the table of diversity, and this is an exercise that I recommend everyone do, take the table of diversity, whichever version that you have, and I want you to circle or highlight or write down the elements where there are direct DEI activities surrounding that element. So for example, if you have ERGs, if you have leadership development programs, if you have recruitment programs, if you have anything that is directly targeting a group on the table of diversity, I want you to circle it. I haven't counted how many are on the 2025 version, but in the 2023 version, there were 112 elements on the table of diversity. And that doesn't include all aspects of identity. That's just 112 of them. And so you can't make 112 different ERGs. You can't have 112 different leadership development programs. You can't have 112 different recruiting procedures. Like that just doesn't make sense. So when I say that you can't fit the table of diversity into what you're doing today, it's because once you expand your definition of diversity, and that doesn't even count the intersections, what you're doing today is not sustainable. Some of the things that are happening today that are DEI best practices can't be sustainable if you're utilizing the table of diversity. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge to think about, how we do this work, but it's a challenge for us to make this sustainable and to make it inherent into the way our organizations operate. So it's not an activity. It's not something that is separate. It is inherently baked into our organization, the way inclusion and equity is supposed to be. And so this is the challenge to do that. Intersectionality is really the thing that says, okay, we might have gotten by when we talked about expanding our definition of diversity. We've created some additional things like more ERGs, more. Intersectionality says, okay, the more doesn't make sense anymore, because just like the example that I provided earlier, even if we make more, there are still people who are going to be left in the margins. There are still people who are going to be forgotten about, who are going to be invisible. And so it changes everything. So it focuses on the individual, team, and organizational. And then we get to the third objective. And before I get there, these are not phases, right? These are not things where you have to go through phase one, the first objective, to get to the second, to get to the third. You could focus on all three at the same time, which is probably going to happen anyway, because as you are expanding your definition of diversity and expanding how you see and value people, as you are thinking about intersectionality, especially if you're using the table of diversity, you're going to see that there are prompts on the table of diversity that are going to get you to think about these things at a systemic level. You're not going to get around it. It's going to plant those seeds as you go through each objective, so that it encourages you, it prompts you, it challenges you to think about it, not just as it impacts in people individually or teams, but also what can we do with our influence in our sphere of the world, whether that's in your home, it's in your neighborhood, your homeowners association, your kids' school, your church. But then also, some of us have the power within our organizations to facilitate change at a systemic level. Some of us have the power within our local government, state government, federal government to facilitate change at a systemic level. And the table of diversity, that's the end goal, right? It's to get us to a point where we can affect change at a systemic level, starting with the individual, and at some point it does reach to the systemic level, but it's not something that you have to go through in a phase. It could be something that you're tackling all at the same time, just whatever works, whatever makes the most sense for where you are in the journey. So the systemic disadvantage and advantage, hopefully you were able to join me for the webinar that I did last week. Actually, I was trying to think, it feels like it's been forever, but it was just last week that I did the webinar on systemic disadvantage and systemic advantage, where I kind of talked about how I'm shifting the language on the table of diversity to no longer talk about identities that are privileged, but to shift it away from that so that we focus on the system and not necessarily the person. The person is the recipient of that privilege or systemic advantage, but they also might be a recipient of systemic marginalization or disadvantage. But the key here is the system. And so if we can put more focus on that collectively, then we're able to explore what those patterns are and then implement things that disrupt, transform, and revolutionize the system. So those are the three objectives of the table of diversity. And, it's what makes sense for your organization. And what I'll tell you is that most folks are like, well, we want to start with intersectionality. And I get it. I'm probably the most passionate about the intersectionality piece as I'm talking about these three things. And so that probably comes through as I'm talking about it and persuades folks that that's where they need to start. But let me just say that you don't want to skip the first objective and get straight to the second objective. The second objective, you're going to have to tackle the first one, but you don't want to go to the second objective if you still have folks that need to focus on the first objective. because this tool it can meet people where they are, but it's also a tool that can be advanced and could be really advanced. And so you don't want to start off at a place that is too advanced for people where they feel left behind, where they feel like it's over their head. It doesn't make sense, because once you've done that, you've lost them, and now you're playing a game of catch up. How do we catch these people up to ensure that they understand what we're talking about, they understand why it's important, and really at the end of the day, all the things that we say about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about people feeling seen, feeling valued, feeling heard, so that they can thrive, they can positively impact products and services, organizations can make more money, all the things that you've traditionally heard about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The table of diversity is the way to get us there. It's the way to get us there in a way that is sustainable, it is inherent, and it's surprisingly easy because of some of the tools that I've created, like the table of diversity starter kit, which includes the activity and the discussion guide. And so when you think about kind of this universe that's been put together that is really user friendly, really the question is it something that you're willing to challenge yourself on? You're willing to challenge your team? You're willing to challenge your organization to say, okay, how can we do this in a way that positively impacts everyone, that is inclusive of everyone? Because if you find yourself on the table of diversity, then you're meant to be here. You're meant to do this work. You're meant to be part of it, and can help us get to where we want to be, both the short-term goals and the long-term goals. And I find that organizations that do this work, that utilize the table of diversity, they get there faster, they get there more efficiently, they get there with less resistance, because you have folks who are like, wait a minute, I don't know that I've always been positively impacted by some of this work, but I see that there might be an opportunity here. And then you have folks who are like, I have always been on the receiving end of this work, but I don't know that it's always worked effectively for me. I don't know that I've seen the results that I'm looking for. And the table of diversity is just a tool to help us get there. So those are the three objectives. Those are the things that have recently been updated or added to ensure that as we are doing this work, we're not just thinking about how can we be nicer to one another, but how can we facilitate change that is going to outlast all of us, and that's going to continue to have that ripple effect outside of our local ecosystem. So it's not just making those changes in our neighborhood, but that the changes that are made in our homeowners association start to have a ripple effect outside of that, and it's something that we can see, and that we can measure, and something that we can be proud of. So that's it. That's all I'm going to talk about today. I could go on. I just facilitated a 90-minute session for folks who have the table of diversity starter kit that includes the activity and discussion set, so that they can effectively utilize it within their organization. They can train their team on how to use it. And one thing that I forgot to mention, with this activity and discussion set, there's one activity, right? The What's Your Diversity Formula activity. I facilitate this in every single training that I do. But there's 3 ways to do a debrief. And each of the 3 ways to do the debrief align with the 3 objectives. And that's just another way this tool meets you where you are, meets your team where you are, to get you to that next level. So those were some of the things that I was talking about today with folks who have purchased the table of diversity starter kit, that includes the discussion and activity guide, so that they are well prepared to use this. We talked about some of the goals that they have and how this tool can really help them get there, and be the most inclusive and equitable as they get there, because it's not just about getting there, it's about the process in which we use to get there. And there's been so much thought and intentionality behind all aspects of the table of diversity that this is it. This is it. And I'm not just saying it because it's my baby, but I truly believe that this is it. So until next time, thank you so much for joining me. Next week, same time, I believe. Actually, it's going to be at 10 a.m. Tuesday, January 21st, 10 a.m. on this platform. That's Eastern Standard Time. On this platform, diving deeper into that first objective, right? So we're diving deeper into that first objective, really expanding your definition of diversity, expanding how you see yourself and others through a lens that is full, that we can really show up as our full selves. So we're going to dive into that, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the discussion posts that are prompts that are in here, so that you can really go on this journey either by yourself or with your team, but do so in a way that is super intentional and that works towards that end goal of, really facilitating systemic change. So if you haven't already been invited to that, I'm inviting you to that now. And if you want to learn more, just visit my page in the events section and you'll see more about how you can be notified. It's all taking place on the platform. So you don't have to receive a special link on Zoom or Teams or any of that. Everything will happen here. So wherever you're seeing me now, that's where you can see me on Tuesday, January 21st, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks so much, everyone. See ya.